a Victory school before decile ratings. It had a cohort of people that by Nelson standards were completely different. It was a school of about 230. 30 or more percent of all crime reported in the Tasman area was within 4 streets of our school. 70% of all the RTLB services were spent on 230 children because of behaviour and learning difficulties. And there were a lot of social dysfunction. A lot of New Zealand houses. 67% of all our school roll in any one year came in and moved out. So if you're a school teacher, you would have known the paper rolls. Yep. 3 paper rolls, names crossed off. So what I'm doing is just putting you into a context of why Victory Primary School and its community made a deliberate decision, very organic initially. It was more around, let's do something better for these young people and their families. And that, I am saying, is from a principles point of view, not a perspective of health and social welfare and early education and all the other sectors that in effect, including myself, tended to push away initially. So the context of the school, it had a spirit and spunk, had about 26 New Zealanders, mainly the Rackleys for boxing, the Wrights for basketball, and Terry Wright, the rugby player. So it had a proud history, but also a very deficit thinking by Nelson of the other side of the tracks. And I suppose the story of us as a school and a community working collaboratively, making a deliberate decision to do that, was to overcome some of the deficits thinking that was ingrained in our community, ingrained in our school, and ingrained by agencies as well. We decided deliberately to make things better for our young people. We knew there was functionally things wrong with our school, things that weren't working for our families. Why were 67% moving on? Why was it that 70% of the RTLB service was in our school? There was a systems failure that wasn't serving our community well, beyond just our school. So that meant in social welfare, housing and health. So we used and came to terms to describe what we were doing organically initially, was that we were a leaderful community. There are many leaders within our school and our community that we were wanting to come together to look at what was not working for our community. And the Families Commission have done research and those type of things, so there's evidencing of it. So that decision about making things different had to do with the climate of our school, what we call inclusiveness now, and there are a lot of words in the educational term to describe how we can include people so that they feel that they belong to a school community. In effect, the school community was made up of many communities. So when a school initially looked at consultation, it was a very narrow view of our community. And it was often those that were easily accessed, that were articulate or had an avenue or wanted to come to a meeting, often probably bribed by food or kai. From a community developer's point of view, that's not consultation. That was not looking and listening to our community. So part of that 2 years initially of understanding about change, about understanding about how we can partner with other people other than just the traditional vision of a primary school, was looking at those other support people and leaders in our community that could assist our school to make it better for our children and our families. So that community development side of things encouraged us to be robust and vigilant about reaching all our communities. And even a brainstorming session, even when the school was reasonably small, we were able to identify quite clearly 20 or more communities within our community, within our school learning community. So for example, there were the faith groups, And in the past they might have been classified as the Pacific Island, but in effect there were Tongan, Pacifica, Cook Island, and then within the Tongan group there might have been 4 or 5 groups within that. So to start identifying and listening to each of those communities, so they were given some mana and a voice, and to understand what works for them to give feedback. And some of it was crap about the school. Actually, the school was the bully. In effect, the school had put up the big hand. No, keep out. And I think now, and it's a long time, and there are some very fine staff that taught there, but I think it was a mentality of schools that didn't think beyond the school gate. So that boundary that we put in our head was one of the things that we actively talked about breaking down. We were told very clearly that this school needed to be safe, it needed to be fun, and our children needed to feel engaged and committed along with their parents in the education. And if we gave our school a report, we'd fail pretty badly looking back on those things. We openly said we need our community help to do this. So that notion of that the children are there only for academic is, in my eyes, completely wrong. Negs and nags say that we look at the well-being, the physical, emotional and social well-being. So if you take that for a child, part of it was assisting the family as well. There were things that we did. When we listened, we understood that many of our mums didn't fulfil their own education. They had their needs weren't met in an educational sense. They were trapped in cold houses, so we looked at including mums at school. The language we use. What language is inclusive? What language do we use with the DHB who have got contracts that they can see that they are part of this school learning community? It might have been messy at the beginning, a little bit literally go and have coffee with a DHB provider. Because why? Because we know that they have programs to do with nutrition that might assist our families and our children. It might be that they have money or resources or time that can assist our community. So we shared our charters together. So again, that was a common thing about what did we have in common. It's our families and our community. But that was a deliberate act of starting to make sense of that initial organic type style of relationship building, and some of it was pretty simple. It was like, oh, you're the manager of the New Zealand Housing, can we have a coffee together to talk about some of our families? Because it was a deliberate act to start to address some of the things about the physical well-being of children and their families. And when there were conversations such as the housing one, when the managers understood that a family that moves 2 or 3 times in 2 or 3 years, because the housing need is not what it was in the Victory area, if they as an organisation could lessen the movement and transient, they actually added to that family's stability and ultimately that child's achievement and learning. So there were simple things like that that we're able to share together, collaborate together to make a difference with that child. We ended up in a summary having about 24 different social, health and educational services on our school campus that weren't there permanently, but had a relationship and a commitment of wanting to provide what is available for our families, so that it ultimately strengthened a family, strengthened a child, and strengthened our community. It was about using our school buildings as a public resource. So how can we collaboratively work with our iwi, where they were short of accommodation? It's simple. Opening up our doors after school and saying it's free for the community. So I think we ended up with 5 early childhood centres, 7 different languages after school, midwives, cervical testing, mental health, WINS, a whole lot of different things. What happened was that our parents, who often had experience of education that weren't positive, started to retrust the relationships they had with people from agencies that they either couldn't get to, and we're only about a 1.5 k from centre of town, but that was enough for them not to go to a health service. Mums wanted to go back to Polytech, so out of that was, well, what can we as a school do to collaborate together to provide that childcare? So there were some simple things that the school seeded some money, because sometimes, and we seeded lots of things, we even seeded taxis to get the mum there so that they attended. So that's when we had started to have contracts with TEC about foundation English and mathematics courses at school. Some of it was after school and prefabs and things like that in school buildings. We fortunately went from 230 kids, we're on a growing roll, to under 500. So we were able to use growth money, use our facilities, but we also ended up with about 10 community buildings on our school site. Now, some would say, well, where the hell did you get that money? When you actively collaborate with our community, resources start coming back. Ideas come back. We had space but no money. We had no more money than any other decile 2 school in New Zealand. But it's that, reciprocity? The housing people said, yes, look, we know there are some houses that are going to be demolished. We picked them up, refurnished them, Trust Bank paid for them. So after a while, we got these facilities to be able to provide the demand of what the community was wanting. We actually had a number of community meetings. Some of it was the agency provision. So we were looking at those that were able to support Victory community. And we identified that there were literally something like 40 agencies. We invited them to come and talk about our community, what we had in common, to get to know each other at a very early level. Again, it was about creating a relationship, creating that there may be a sense of moral purpose in this community of Nelson and agencies, and a shared purpose. So out of 2, I can think of 2 meetings, again we paid for a facilitator, and we used String. We were able to link in, how did our school relate, and there were a whole lot of gaps where our school didn't relate to any of the people sitting in the room. The ones that were many came to, and then they would say we didn't have the resources, and then others would say, well, actually we're given money by MSD, how about we look at this together? So it might have been something from the school was an initiator, yep, absolutely. But they became more stand-out leaders that were committed to this community.